Wednesday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us. Everyone in.
You're very welcome along to Wednesday Night Rugby. Delighted to say with me to have a look at the upcoming games this weekend is Ruaidhri O'Connor from the Irish Independent. Ruaidhri, a slightly early Happy New Year to you.
And to you and all the listeners.
We're kind of in the midst of the festive schedule, but things have been rocked quite a bit by COVID-19. Leinster particularly, Rory, you know, it's been a difficult week or so for them. That fixture against Munster postponed last weekend after the round of PCR testing, and then subsequently 2 players have now been diagnosed with COVID-19, with the issue around close contacts as well. This makes it pretty difficult preparation for Leo Cullen's side ahead of Saturday's game with Connacht.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it kind of was only a matter of time. It was funny, I was on a podcast before Christmas and we were talking, waxing lyrical about how Irish rugby had handled all of this and had kind of sailed through it, and within about less than 24 hours of recording, the Munster-Leinster game was cancelled, so maybe we tempted a bit of fate. And like it turned out, they were false positives, I think, in the Leinster camp, but they basically fell outside of the guidelines, the allotted timeline, so they had to call it. Turned out they could have played that game, and the way things are going with numbers and all of that, you wonder whether they'll regret that in the end, because I think we're going to run out of weekends if numbers keep going the way they're going. And you're right, you know, the fact that these players were tested after a Christmas break and were caught before they kind of became part of the group again and trained again means that they can proceed as normal with the players who, you know, those players are now isolated. They don't name the players, we don't know who they are. Those players are isolating at home. The rest of the squad have reassembled and are training towards the Connacht game, and indications are that game will go ahead as normal. So at least they can get back on the road. But yeah, I mean, we don't know. It could be their starting tight head prop. It could be their starting out half. Leo Cullen has definitely got some rejigging to do if there's a couple of players out. But you know, he's got a big squad, and the way things are shaping up in the Pro 14, he needs to play these games, because with only one team in each conference going into the final, and Ulster also unbeaten in their conference, there's kind of a competitive need to play all these games and make sure matters are decided on the pitch rather than in some committee room where they you know, that Munster game could, in theory, end up being awarded to Munster on the basis that Leinster had to call it. So it's a tricky time. It's a tricky time for all sport. Like Premier League is looking at taking a 2-week break. You know, rugby can't afford to do that with the weekends that are there. And I think it's about muddling through at the moment.
Yeah, because things at this stage, Rory, are already condensed into a pretty short period. You've still got the couple of pool fixtures to be completed in the Champions Cup, just the far side of Christmas. And we had the news earlier today about the rescheduled fixtures for games between the provinces and Italian and Welsh teams, which have now slotted into what was the mini break coming up over the next week and a bit as well. So the league is kind of playing a constant catch-up on those fixtures that were lost earlier this season as well.
Yeah, and last week they announced a very ambitious plan to expand into South Africa and end the tournament early in March, and then within a month start playing it in this Rainbow Cup, which I think in a normal year you could understand the ambition of it and everything, but this year it does seem like a tricky thing to pull off. And I did speak to a couple of people behind the scenes who said that there is a good chance that they may be playing regular fixture games after the final or even the weekend of the final, just to decide European places and things like that, because they want it to be decided on the pitch. But yeah, so those games have been refixed for the weekend before the Six Nations, and Connacht have a few games during the Six Nations. Munster-Leinster, I would imagine, will take place the same weekend as Ireland's first Six Nations game, which obviously for a fixture of that magnitude is not ideal, but it is what it is. They got to get on with it. I think they can probably each afford one more cancellation and refixture before they start running out of weekends. I think there's a couple of teams who are probably up at that number already. So, when we go into South Africa, there's a whole new ballgame. I think it will be across 7 different public health jurisdictions at that point. It becomes at the moment it's 6, and it's already pretty hard to manage. And, we saw what happened in the second round of Europe when 4 games had to be decided by a pools committee. So we are in uncharted water when it comes to these things. And as I say, it's very tight in Leinster's conference of the Pro 14. Munster are so far ahead; they're probably in the final already. Really, if you look at it, but between Leinster and Ulster, really, both of those teams want it decided on the pitch and not in some sort of committee room.
Yeah, the Rainbow Cup, I should say, with the South African teams coming in to effectively make it an early Pro 16 for that fixture, which is being seen essentially as a competition, as a bridging competition to get both South Africa prepared for the visit of the Lions and also for the Lions players to get warmed up for that trip to South Africa this summer. as you say, it is pretty ambitious to think this is going to happen, particularly when you consider not just the spike in COVID-19 figures in Ireland and Britain over the last while, but South Africa, who are having their own issues with COVID-19 currently. I know the end of March is quite some time away, but to me it seems very ambitious to have all that kind of intercontinental travel, which is set to take place during that tournament as well.
Absolutely. I mean, this was on the cards. South African rugby needs a tournament before the Lions come over, and the basically the money that the Pro 14 clubs receive from the South African Union from their broadcasters through the South African Union as part of the participation agreement, which comes to around €1 million. I think it's either 800 to €1 million. Couldn't be released until they arrange these matches, and I think the need for cash and the kind of pressing need to kind of have a schedule sorted out beyond, like after next week's games, there was no fixtures in the Pro 14, so they kind of had to get something in line. But I know someone who had the whole Lions tour booked and all their hotels were cancelled last week. So, in anticipation that it won't go ahead because of the way the COVID is being handled in South Africa, that I think they're going to be behind in terms of vaccinations. So even if all the European people are vaccinated, whether they can transmit the disease or not, I'm not sure. But the South Africans may not be in a position to welcome the fans, and really without the fans, the Lions tour is kind of not viable. But whether this tournament is viable with teams zipping in and out of different countries and across continents, it's very hard to predict at this stage. I mean, it's very hard to be optimistic about anything as we await the next kind of set of lockdown here. But yeah, they're set up for it. That's what's in the schedule from the middle of April, and the fixtures sound quite enticing and interesting, and it is something new, but it's very hard. It's a big leap to see, to get from where we are now and the way the picture is presenting itself right now to actually seeing that stuff all go ahead at that point. And we've so many different bridges to cross between now and then. I think getting through the next month of games without major hitches will be a serious success for organisers of all competitions.
Well, a player who's going to be staying in South Africa beyond the Lions tour of South Africa is Marcel Coetzee. He's going to be going to the Bulls. I think understandably on Saturday afternoon, Rory, quite a bit of frustration from the management within Ulster about the fact that he's leaving his contract early to go back to South Africa. Particularly when Ulster were so loyal to him at a time that he was injured, offered him a new contract, and here he is leaving still well inside his deal. Yes, I mean, I can understand why both Ulster are annoyed, and I can understand why Marcel Coetzee wants to go home. And I guess he could look at the example of Ruaidhri O'Connor, who wanted to stay in Ireland and was fairly coldly shown the door by the RFU at the time. Loyalty is an interesting concept in professional sport. Like he has made a choice. He wants to live and work in his homeland. And this year, above all years, I think people have realised they need to kind of be true to what they want in life. So, I don't, Ulster will survive ultimately. He's a very, very good player. They're very reliant on him at the moment. But, if that's what he wants to be, there's no point in having a kind of a sulky player. Not that he has been. He's been very good, even though he's been weighing this up in his mind. But if he's doesn't want to be there, wish him well and replace him. There are good players out there on the market. And I guess the other thing is that he's already taken cuts and deferrals this year. I guess the nature of professional sport and the precarious nature of the job that he's in has probably presented itself to him, and he's made a decision that he wants to be at home. And I don't think anyone can really begrudge him that. Once the initial annoyance about the kind of the fact that he's leaving early presents, kind of passes, I think he's repaid every bit of faith Ulster showed him. I think he's been their best player for the last couple of years, and he's really been committed, and he's got them through a lot of big games. So I don't think they can really have any grudges. And what's going to be interesting now is whether there's budget or permission from the RFU to go and replace him from abroad. And Dan McFarland was pretty insistent at the weekend too, the couple of times he spoke about Coetzee kind of pre and post the Connacht game. He insists he's going to stay professional. He is a player there who can still be very important for them. And as you said at the outset, there's still now every chance that Ulster could get themselves into a Pro 14 final this season.
Absolutely, yeah, and he has been. I mean, this has obviously been something. I think he went home for, reading what he said, he went home for lockdown, and when they came back, himself and his partner or wife, they decided that really South Africa was where they wanted to be. But you wouldn't know from watching him play. He's been excellent, and he has been excellent. Apart from those serious knee injuries that he had, and Ulster stood by him at the time. he has been a really, really good signing and a really, really important player for Ulster. And I think he will want to, leave on a high note and make sure that there's no question over it. But that, even if people are annoyed about him leaving early, that while he was here, he gave everything he had. And in fairness, he's been superb for them and will continue to be. And he's been one of the reasons they've been unbeaten in the Pro 14 this season.
Ulster, as you mentioned, top of Conference A currently, extending that lead at the weekend with their first win in Galway against Connacht in 5 seasons, winning in the end by 32 points to 19, really on the back of a huge second half performance from Ulster. When you look at it, I guess you got to give all the compliments for Ulster with the way they used the elements and the rugby they played in the second half. But I'm sure at the same time, Rory, Connacht will be very disappointed given the amount of ball and territory they had in the first half, that they didn't have a more substantial lead at the break.
Definitely, and you look at the team that Ulster sent down. They were definitely resting a few up for the visit of Munster this weekend, or managing them under the player management. That was a team that, on paper, Connacht at home should have been looking to beat, and they had the opportunities, they had the elements in their favour in the first half, and didn't make it pay. But I guess this is the value of Ulster went out last summer and recruited Ian Madigan and Albie Matthewson, 2 experienced game managers at halfback, to come in the weeks when John Cooney and Billy Burns are away, and it's worked out really, really well for them. And those 2 players in particular, I thought Nick Timoney was excellent. I thought Jordy Murphy, they were really abrasive in the back row. They were poor at the scrum, but they rolled that out. But Connacht had a lot of dominance in a lot of areas and just really couldn't make it pay. And then they, chasing lead into that wind, Mathewson and Ian Madigan kept pinning them back. And they just kept running into brick walls and making mistakes and handing the initiative back to Ian Madigan. And he kicked brilliantly on the night. So you're right. I mean, Connacht are in a little bit of a rut now, and they go to the RDS needing a win in a venue that they haven't won. And I can't remember exactly when, but it's an awful long time. It's not a place you want to go in this competition looking for a result. So they're in a bit of a hole. And again, they've Leinster at home and then Munster after that. And they very rarely beat Munster as well. So they kind of risk going into those Racing and Bristol games on the back of 5 or 6 consecutive defeats, and they're probably not going to win those either. So suddenly you're in a difficult place, and that was the one on their schedule that looked the most winnable. Yeah,
I think it's almost 20 years since Connacht have won in Dublin. I'm not sure, was it 0-2 or 0-3? It was around about that territory where they last won in Dublin. They might never get a better chance, though, coming up against the Leinster team who, as you mentioned early on, have had a very kind of disjointed couple of weeks now. Maybe this is the exact time for Connacht to come and spring a shock.
Possibly. I mean, a lot depends on the team that they're able to field. I mean, I think an automated email went out and they showed their hand. We saw what team they were going to send to Thomond Park, and it was very much under strength. You would imagine that, having given a lot of the internationals Christmas off, that some of them will be back this week, and that it will be a stronger team. And for all that they've had a disjointed preparation, they do have a very strong system and and they all know their details very, very well. So I think they will be able to click back into gear pretty well. And they've won every game at a bonus point in this competition this season, even when their internationals have been away. Connacht came very close to beating them in this fixture 2 years ago in Andy Friend's first season in an epic at the RDS. And they do have the capacity and the players to come and upset them. But, it depends on whether they're having to rest Bundy Aki as well. He makes a huge difference to them. You're right. It's an opportunity. I wouldn't see it as a golden opportunity. We'll know more when the teams are named, but I still think Leinster have enough within their squad and within their locker to beat pretty much anyone in the Pro 14, whether they're playing their A team or their B team.
And while for Connacht it's important to win to try and keep up the chase at the top of their pool, at the same time I think they really need a win from one of these fixtures now too, because they've put in some pretty valiant performances in recent weeks, including the couple of losses in Europe and then slipping off against Ulster last week. They could really do to try and get out of this bad run of form that they're in. They could do with a big win.
Yeah, and I mean, we don't know what Europe is going to look like next season, but they had a lead in second place, and I'm just looking at the table here. Like they're level on points with Scarlets, and they're only 2 ahead of Cardiff. And if they fall behind either of those or both of those teams, then they fall out of what we think will be the European places for next season. So it's a much narrower window this year because there's not as many games to get back in. So yes, they need to reward themselves for their own hard work and their own good play, because they put together some lovely moves in that Connacht game in the Ulster game, and Tom Daly looked very good. Sammy Arnold was very competitive. Their pack did a lot of things right, but really the brass tacks is, like, you know, if they want to get back into the Champions Cup next season, they've got to start picking up points. And, you know, those two Welsh regions are coming quite hard behind them, and so they can't really afford to lose much more ground. And it's going to be difficult in the next 2 weeks to pick up too many points.
Belfast then on Saturday evening too. Ulster against Munster. As I mentioned, Ulster getting the win against Connacht last weekend, kind of brushing off the defeat at King's Home in Europe the week before. You would imagine that Dan McFarland has got some good options ahead of this. You know, 17 players are missing for various different reasons, but a lot of their key players from the Irish camp, like Rob Herring, like Billy Burns, were rested under the player management programme. They're going to all be available to come back in for this game against Munster.
We think so, yes. And I think Munster, having, you know, probably would have planned to rest players for this game. I'm not sure whether they can now play them after, you know, resting players, after not having a game last weekend against Leinster. I'm not sure if the training week counted as part of their kind of time in camp, if you know what I mean. So Munster probably were looking at this game as the one where they'd send up a few, to get rest up their Peter O'Mahony and Cedar Sanders, the player who had a kind of heavily involvement in the Six Nations. So this, if you think back to this time last year, this was the fixture where it was John Cooney and Conor Murray, and it was a big win for Ulster on the night. Munster have had, this is a real, this will be a good game, I think. Even if Munster send up a couple of their younger players, that, you know, we know now that their younger players are more than capable of mixing it, and I think they can really put it up to Ulster, even if Ulster put out the first team. But it'd be interesting to see if Ian Madigan gets the nod, or they bring Billy Burns back in. You know, it's very hard to drop Ian Madigan on the back of what he did last weekend. Mathewson the same, you know, like they've got real options in those halfback positions. They probably hope to bolster their set piece a little bit, particularly their scrum. Their scrum struggled. But I think this is possibly the game of the weekend, you know, and possibly the game of the Christmas, because it's in the absence of Leinster, Munster. I think these are two well-matched teams. Like Munster have a 12-point cushion at the top of Conference B, as I mentioned, whereas Ulster really need to keep winning. So, but I think Munster want the momentum to keep going after that win in Claremont, and maybe getting a weekend off, they might be well set for this one. Yeah,
we're chatting to Brian O'Driscoll last week, and his feeling on Munster was that's a huge confidence booster to be 19 points down in France, come back and win the game. And then you look at the kind of injury updates coming back from Munster, and you see some of the cavalry are coming back in. You see Dave Kilcoyne back doing a bit of training. Even I saw a picture during the week. I know he's probably still a bit away, but Joey Carberry was at least out doing a bit of kicking. When some of these players come back in, there's going to be some good competition in that Munster squad.
Absolutely. Because the young players, there have been times where Munster looked the most reliant on the internationals, whereas now that kind of contingent of 21, 22, 23-year-olds who've come onto the scene in the last year really look like the real deal, and the players who will take this forward over the next decade. And yes, you're right. I mean, Liam Coombs did so well in the absence of James Cronin and Dave Kilcoyne and Jeremy Loughman. Now they all have a fire lit under them from his performance. You know, Ben Healy's been shooting the lights out in Joey Carberry's absence. JJ Hanrahan stood up in Claremont. He's not going to hand the jersey back. Suddenly you've got a question, where do we put Joey Carberry? I think he will still be their outstanding 10 if he can ever get back to the level that he was at. And that's the big if at the moment. But we do hope that in the new year we will see him back. I think it's that Ulster fixture last year may have been the last time he played. Certainly it's one of his last games, which is just crazy to think that he's missed almost a year out of the game, and a bit more, if you factor in the fact that he was injured during the World, or just before the World Cup. So no, Munster definitely in a really, really good place going into 2021. They've got real quality coming through the ranks to supplement the really experienced core. Plus, I know Schneimann's injured, but they've got that Springbok class and Delande as well. So they're really well set up, and I think they're set up to go up there and really give it a rattle in Kingspan Stadium.
I would imagine JJ Hanrahan starts, given that Healy is only just coming back from his injury currently. I would think that performance in the south of France from him has to be a huge confidence booster as well, Rory, because there's been loads of people, talking over the last year or two that, Hanrahan doesn't have it in those clutch moments. He's going to miss important set pieces. And there he was, not just playing very well with the ball in hand against Clermont-Auvergne, but he held his nerve brilliantly when he was kicking that day as well.
Absolutely, and he seems to be a very confidence-based kind of player. Like a lot of players, but it does seem like when things are going for him, he rides with that, and when it goes against him, it can get on top of him. And there was two big touch finders that he missed in that game. Damien Pinot came brilliantly from out of touch and kept the ball in, and there was another one that went dead, and they could have got to him because they've got to him in big games before. I think for JJ Hanrahan, he almost encapsulates where Munster are at the moment. It's all about backing it up. It's all about making sure that that performance is not a flash in the pan, that great win, that great fill-up of confidence is something that he can build on and put back to back. And it was a shame that they didn't get to show against Leinster that they were able to do that. That 7 days later, they were able to go out and put in another big performance against another big team. But this is just as big a test going up to Kingspan Stadium. You would imagine Hanrahan's the man in possession. I would like to see Jack Crowley at some stage over Christmas. I don't know if that cancellation has put paid to his chances, but I think he's a really promising player as well. I'd like to see him get some time off the bench, because I think long term he could be a real player for Munster as well. But Hanrahan is the man in possession. I think it's Healy was going very well, and there was possibly an argument for starting him in Claremont. But Hanrahan, still even in that Claremont game wasn't perfect. But you would hope that those kicks and the way that he closed out that game and took the right decisions at the right time will definitely mean that he goes into the new year with real confidence and belief in his own ability. That the ability has always been unquestioned with JJ Hanrahan. It's sometimes just been the decision making on the pitch or the execution that's let him down. And I know Munster fans and coaches' patience were sometimes wearing thin, but he's almost always been fit when they've needed him, when other players have not been able to pitch up, and he's very durable, and he has shown remarkable resilience to come back from some of the knocks that he's had.
Well, 2 Interpro derbies coming up in the Guinness Pro 14 this coming weekend. The first of those fixtures at 5:15 in Belfast. It's Ulster against Munster, and that's followed by the RDS meeting of Leinster and Connacht at 8:25. Ruaidhri O'Connor from the Irish Independent, many thanks for joining us.
Cheers, Will.
We'll take a very short break. When we come back, we'll be hearing from the Wexford hurling boss, Davy Fitzgerald.
Wednesday night on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us, everyone in.